Imagine you're given a significant sum of money by your employer. There's just one instruction: do something worthwhile with it. No guidance, no specific details, just the expectation that you'll use it wisely and bring back more than you were given. Now put yourself in that position. What would you do? Invest it? Save it? Spend it on something you think will pay off? What if you're afraid of losing it? This is the challenge that Jesus presents in the parable of the talents. It's a story that speaks to all of us because in one way or another, we've each been given gifts, resources, or opportunities that we're responsible for. And this parable challenges us to think about how we're using them. The parable of the talents is found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 14 to 30. In this part of the Gospel, Jesus is sharing a series of teachings to prepare his followers for what's coming, his eventual departure and eventual return. These teachings are meant to illustrate what it means to live faithfully and responsibly while waiting for that return. It's essential to understand that in Jesus' time, a talent was an enormous sum of money. One talent was roughly equivalent to 20 years' wages for an average worker. So when we're talking about 5, 2, or even just 1 talent, we're not talking about pocket change. We're talking about life-changing amounts of wealth. So when Jesus tells this story, it would have instantly grabbed the attention of his listeners. They understood that receiving a talent meant being entrusted with something incredibly valuable. So, with that context in mind, let's dive into the parable and break down what it's really saying. In the parable, a wealthy man is preparing to go on a long journey. Before he leaves, he calls 3 of his servants and entrusts them with different amounts of talents, each according to their abilities. To one servant he gives 5 talents, to another he gives 2 talents, and to the third he gives 1 talent. Then he goes away, leaving them with full responsibility for these sums. Now here's where the story starts to get interesting. The first servant, the one who received 5 talents, immediately gets to work. He invests the money, trading and working with it, and eventually he doubles it. When the master returns, this servant now has 10 talents to show for his efforts. The second servant, who received 2 talents, does something similar. He also invests and works with what he's been given, and he too doubles his investment, ending up with 4 talents. But the third servant, well, he takes a very different approach. Instead of putting his talent to work, he decides to bury it in the ground. He's afraid of taking any risks, so he hides it to keep it safe. For a long time, he does nothing with it, hoping that when the master returns, he'll be content that at least nothing was lost. Finally, the master returns from his journey, and he calls each of his servants to settle accounts. The first servant proudly shows him that he's doubled the 5 talents to 10. The master is thrilled, calling him a good and faithful servant, and he rewards him by giving him even greater responsibilities. The second servant steps forward with his 4 talents, having also doubled his original amount. The master praises him as well and rewards him with more responsibilities. Then comes the third servant. He steps forward and explains his decision. He says, "Master, I knew that you're a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours." The master's response is harsh. He calls him a wicked and lazy servant, and rebukes him for not at least putting the talent in a bank where it could have earned interest. He then takes the talent away from the third servant and gives it to the one who has 10. And the parable concludes with a strong statement. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. This parable has layers of meaning and invites us to think about several key ideas. First, let's talk about the talents themselves. Although they're represented as money in the parable, talents can symbolize any resources, gifts, or opportunities that were given. It could be literal resources, like finances, but it could also mean time, skills, knowledge, or unique life experiences. In this way, every one of us has talents in the form of things that we can work with and grow. The servants' actions represent different attitudes towards these gifts. The first two servants take initiative. They recognize the value of what they've been given, and they immediately set to work using it. There's no hesitation, and there's no fear. They invest, take risks, and ultimately they create something valuable with what they were given. The third servant, however, shows us something very different: fear and inaction. Instead of viewing his talent as an opportunity, he sees it as a burden. His focus is on the potential for loss rather than the potential for growth. Rather than seeing himself as capable of handling the responsibility, he feels overwhelmed and unworthy. One of the main lessons here is about faithfulness and responsibility. Jesus is teaching that when we're entrusted with resources or opportunities, it's our responsibility to make the most of them. This isn't just about financial gain or success in the world's terms, it's about growth, creativity, and service. There's also an element of risk in the story. The first two servants didn't know for certain that their efforts would pay off. They took a leap, and it was through that willingness to act that they doubled their talents. This contrasts sharply with the third servant, who lets fear dictate his actions. The parable seems to be saying that sometimes, in order to be faithful, we have to take risks. Finally, this parable suggests that what we do with our gifts and resources has eternal significance. In the end, the master rewards the first two servants not just with praise, but with greater responsibilities. This can be understood as a symbol for growth and blessings in life, but it also points to a spiritual truth. When we're faithful with what we've been given, we're prepared to handle more. So, how does this ancient parable apply to us today? Each of us has been given talents, whether it's a unique skill, a passion, or a set of resources or connections. Some people are gifted with artistic abilities, others have a talent for teaching, others might have a knack for building community or organizing events, and sometimes our talents are more subtle. It could be a compassionate heart, an open mind, or even the ability to listen deeply to others. But the message of the parable is clear. We're not meant to hide these gifts. We're called to put them to work. Imagine what would happen if the greatest artists, thinkers, and leaders in history had buried their talents out of fear. What if people like Martin Luther King Jr. or Marie Curie had hidden their abilities instead of using them to impact the world? Today, we live in a world where risk-taking is often celebrated, yet we also face a lot of fear and self-doubt. It's common to feel like what we have isn't enough, or that our efforts won't make a difference. The third servant's story reminds us that even one small talent is valuable. It's worth using, worth growing, worth investing. Playing it safe, burying what we have out of fear, ultimately leads to stagnation. This parable also has implications for how we handle our resources, including finances and time. Are we using what we have in ways that can grow and benefit others? For example, if we have financial resources, are we investing in causes that help others or provide for our communities? If we have time and energy, are we finding ways to serve, create, or improve? This story challenges us to look at the areas in our lives where we might be holding back. It encourages us to take stock of our own talents and to ask ourselves, how am I using what I've been given? Am I afraid of failure, or am I willing to step out in faith, knowing that growth and impact often require risk? So now I want to turn it over to you. What are the talents in your life? Are there gifts, skills, or opportunities that you're holding back on? Are you like the first two servants, actively using what you've been given, or do you find yourself more like the third, hesitant or afraid to step out? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you have a story about how you've overcome fear to use your talents, I'd love to hear it. The parable of the talents is a timeless reminder that life isn't just about what we receive, it's about what we do with it. Whether we've been given a lot or a little, we each have something valuable to offer. This story challenges us to take responsibility for our gifts and to trust that with courage and faith, we can make an impact. If this message resonated with you, consider subscribing for more reflections on life, faith, and growth. And if there's another parable or teaching you'd like to dive into, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and remember, don't bury your talents. Take that first step and see where it leads.